The war against reproductive rights has gone global, with American Christian conservatives targeting some of the world's poorest countries. By now, you've hopefully heard of Project 2025, the conservative blueprint for the next Republican administration that will consolidate power in the presidency and institutionalize Christian nationalism. If Trump returns to power, the checks that restrained him during his first term will disappear. Project 2025 will facilitate the purge of civil servants and experts from various federal agencies, replacing them with loyalists who are aligned with a right-wing agenda. To see what this could mean for America, you only need to look at the first Trump term and how it implemented the Christian nationalist project in Africa, where little oversight allowed the American far right to run wild. It may surprise you to learn that key parts of Project 2025 are already active in parts of Africa and Central America. For years, Christian conservative groups have been lobbying for influence in Washington, collaborating independently with faith-based organizations abroad to promote anti-abortion and anti-LGBT legislation. In his first term, Donald Trump finally gave them the platform that they wanted, appointing far-right ideologues to senior positions in federal agencies who are responsible for international policy. In a further nod to his Christian conservative base, one of the first acts as president was to cut funding for foreign NGOs that shared information on abortion. And the repercussions in Africa have been devastating, forcing many health clinics to shutter and leading to an increase in illegal abortions. In countries like Kenya, Mother Jones reports, quote, virulent anti-abortion activity is not more than a few years old there, the result of a campaign by the Trump administration and ultra-conservative American groups to export Operation Rescue-style tactics to the rest of the world. This report goes on to describe the proliferation of illegal abortions, which are being performed, quote, with tools such as knitting needles, as well as women ingesting traditional herbs, crushed glass, or bleach to terminate pregnancies. These methods kill an estimated 28 women and girls in Kenya each week. Many more seek treatment for complications such as sepsis or organ failure. Despite these disturbing reports, one of Trump's final acts was to formalize his administration's stance through a little-known international agreement known as the Geneva Consensus Declaration, or GCD for short. During its development, career officials at the State Department were notably sidelined in favor of political appointees. The GCD has since become a key part of Project 2025 and uses pro-family rhetoric long associated with opposition to abortion and with LGBT rights. A former senior Trump official and contributing author to Project 2025 named Valerie Huber has been actively promoting the GCD across Africa in the years that since Trump has left office. Now, membership in the GCD requires countries to acknowledge that, quote, there is no international right to abortion, end quote. And while Biden withdrew the U.S. from the GCD, it continues to attract new member countries, notably those with poor human rights records, including Russia, Saudi Arabia, Haiti, and Uganda. Trump seeks to align America with this group of dictatorships. In fact, just last year, Uganda passed an anti-gay bill that includes the death penalty, influenced in part by the efforts of Christian conservative groups in the United States. 5 of the GCD's 37 members are among the worst 10 countries in the world to be a woman, and more than a third of enlisted countries rank in the worst 30. Implementing the GCD's proposals to women in these regions amounts to a death sentence. Given the historical legacy of gender violence in Western colonialism, the GCD's attack on black and brown women's reproductive health is all the more appalling. Access to reproductive health care has been shown to significantly improve the lives of women in poor countries, allowing them to pursue higher education and to join the workforce. Valerie Huber's efforts to enlist autocrats in the GCD, committing their populations without their consent, epitomizes the program's coercive nature. Consider the case of Guatemala. The Central American nation joined the GCD last summer under the backing of its far-right leader, the president, Alejandro Giammattei, who is a close ally of many U.S. Republicans. When the progressive candidate Bernardo Arévalo won the presidency later that year, Giamatei's administration attempted to block his inauguration. What happened next reveals how a future Trump administration is likely to enforce the agenda of Christian nationalists worldwide. Recognizing that Arévalo, the new progressive leader, would be less agreeable to the GCD, 3 Republican senators, Lindsey Graham, James Lankford, and Steve Daines, sent a letter to the new leader pressuring him to remain in the coalition. The senator's letter was first reported by the right-wing Center for Family and Human Rights, whose leadership, no surprise, includes contributors to Project 2025. And it came with a veiled threat warning, quote, a new U.S. pro-life administration next January will likely rejoin the GCD and prioritize grant-making to countries that have pledged commitments to women's holistic health. That's a euphemism, by the way, women's holistic health. In other words, if Guatemala's new progressive leader doesn't play ball with America's religious extremists, crucial American aid to his country will be at risk under a new Trump administration. And perhaps that pressure worked, because as of today, Guatemala remains a member of Donald Trump's global anti-abortion declaration. When we come back, I'll be joined by the very best person I can think of to help us unpack the rise and spread of American-style Christian nationalism. Anthea Butler is the chair of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, and she joins me next. I'm joined now by the esteemed scholar Anthea Butler to discuss how former President Donald Trump contributed to the global spread of Christian nationalism. She's the chair of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Penn and the author of White Evangelical Racism, The Politics of Morality in America. Anthea, good to see you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Ollie.
To some degree, previous Republican presidents have catered to Christian conservative groups, not just in the United States, but around the world. What's different this time?
I think what's different this time is that they have an agenda that's not only a national agenda, but a worldwide agenda. This has been going on underneath the scenes for a long time. I think what people don't realize is that many of these Republican organizations like Heritage Foundation, Focus on the Family, and others have always had a foothold outside of the U.S. through evangelism, through missionary programs and such, sort of a kind of a colonial project, if you were. But now what's different about this is that they are going to use reproductive policies as well as policies on LGBTQ people to try and control different nations around the world. And we can see this in Africa. We can see this in Ghana. We see it in Kenya. We especially see it in Uganda, other places, Guatemala, Bolsonaro, and Brazil. There are many of these instances where the U.S. government, under the guise of Christian nationalism, as they want to put it, are trying to infiltrate countries and control them and do the same kinds of moral issues that are happening here. And I think this is something that we really need to watch out for the spread of Christian nationalism around the world.
Look, colonialism was good for nobody, but at least one could understand what the transaction was. What's the transaction here? What's in it for the Ugandas of the world and the Guatemalas of the world? We sort of hinted at that if you don't do this under a Trump administration, you may get your aid pulled back or you may not receive aid. But fundamentally, what is the influence that American evangelicals or Christian nationalists have over the Ugandans or the Kenyans or anyone else?
First of all, it's about access. It's about access to funds, about access to different kinds of opportunities. Secondarily, it's access to this country. I mean, we talk a lot about borders, but if you want to say, well, you cannot come to this country because you have, X sort of beliefs, then it's important for these nations like Uganda and Kenya and others to sort of play ball with American officials that are on the right so that they will have access not just to funds, but access to travel, access to other things that they may want. The third thing is access to educational opportunities. Many of these people send their best and brightest to the U.S. to study. And if you're not allowed to come in because you're on some kind of a watch list or something like that because you don't follow reproductive policies, I think that would really hamper, progress for especially women in these countries and especially people who are of what I would call not of the kind of people that they would want, i.e., people who are sexually active, people who are homosexuals, and trans people and others. And so it's an imposition of the policies that you see on state and local levels here in the U.S. to be put in other countries around the world.
We've been showing imagery of a woman named Valerie Huber. She's a white woman who represents Christian nationalists. She's been recruiting African and Middle Eastern autocrats for this GCD. There's no sense that this gets done with the approval of any of these populations. In many cases, these are not populations that are entitled to vote. Tell me about this. I mean, the optics of it, just the optics of it is weird. This white American woman going around telling Africans exactly, or people in the Middle East, how it is they should handle relations or matters having to do with gay people and reproductive rights. But beyond that, she seems to be pretty influential.
She is. And let me say this. I think, for us on the outside, it might look as though that's really weird to see a white woman doing this. But you have to understand the history of missionization and colonization in Africa makes people already susceptible to this kind of behavior. So if you're doing this through a Christian lens, in other words, if you're saying, oh, this is what Jesus would want, we want to focus on our families, this is what Christianity is all about, many of these nations are used to having missionaries and other people there. So when you have somebody like Huber coming into the country and sitting down with leaders and everything else and promising money and funds under the guise of we are doing this for the Lord, then what you get is this sort of undercover way to get inside a nation and to begin to influence its policies through the guise of Christianity. And I think what is very important for people to understand is that these organizations already have footholds in these countries through churches. And so if you go in and you're dealing with pastors and others, then it makes it a lot easier to get to the leadership.
There's so much more we need to discuss about this. Anthea, thank you so much for just giving us the tip of the iceberg on this one. Anthea Butler is the chair of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Pennsylvania and a columnist for MSNBC Daily. She's also the author of White Evangelical Racism: The Politics of Morality in America.